Hello everyone, welcome to Coding Octane. Today we will learn how to build custom Docker images using a Dockerfile. We will start with a tiny demo app, create a Dockerfile, build the image, optimize it using a multi-stage build and push it to Docker Hub. By the end, you will know how to create fast, reproducible images you can use anywhere. Make sure you have Docker installed and running and a basic repo for the app. I will use ASP.NET Core app in this demo. In this video, first we will see what is a Docker file, then we will see how we can create a custom Docker file and how we can create a custom image from a Docker file. And then finally we will see how to publish an image to Docker Hub. Now the big question, how do we actually get our source code inside a container? It happens during the image build process. When Docker reads our Docker file, it uses instructions like copy or add to take your source code from your machine and package it into the image. So the idea is simple. Your project folder on the left becomes part of the final container image on the right. You don't manually place files into a running container. Docker bakes everything into the image when you build it. And anything you don't want to copy, like node modules or logs, is excluded using a Docker ignore file. Let's get started with the Docker file. So here is the core idea behind Docker. We start with a Docker file. This is just a simple text file that contains instructions for how to build your application environment. When we run the docker build command, Docker reads that Docker file line by line and executes each step. The output of that build process is Docker image, a packaged, ready to run snapshot that includes your application code, dependencies, libraries, and runtime configuration. In short, we have a Docker file, and when we build it, it becomes a Docker image. And every container you run later is created from this image. Let's take a quick overview of what a Docker file actually is. A Docker file is simply a text file that contains the instructions needed to build a Docker image. Every line in this file tells Docker what to do, which base image to start from, what files to copy, what commands to run, and how the final image should behave. As Docker processes these instructions, it creates intermediate image layers. These layers are cached, which means if nothing has changed, Docker can reuse them in future builds. This caching mechanism is what makes Docker builds incredibly fast and efficient, especially when you are iterating on code. So in short, the Docker file defines the recipe and Docker turns it into repeatable optimized image layers. Here are some of the most important Dockerfile instructions you will use when building Docker image. From defines the base image. This is the starting point for your entire build. Work directory sets the working directory inside the image, so every following instructions knows where it should operate. Expose. Expose documents which port the container will listen on. Next, label. Label lets you add metadata like version, author, or description useful for documentation and automation tools. Run. Run executes commands during the build, often for installing packages or setting up dependencies. env. Env sets environment variables that get baked into the image. Then we have copy. Copy brings your source code or other files into the image. Entry point. Entry point defines the main executable that runs when container starts. And volume. Volume is used to specify directories that should persist data or be mounted from the host. Together, these instructions form the building blocks of any Docker file and control how your final image behaves. Now let's see how we can create a Docker file and how we can create a Docker image from the Docker file, and then we will run a container from that image. So let's create a ASP.NET Core web app from Visual Studio. So our test web app is created. Let's do some modifications in this project. So let's go to index.cshtml. We will say welcome to coding Octane, and let's run this. Okay, so it's running. Let's open the directory where this project is located, and we will create a Docker file in this folder. We create a Docker file, and let's add that into our project. Now we will add content in this Docker file. So now here I have copied the content from my previously created project, and we will explain the content of this Docker file. Let's walk through what this Docker file is doing step by step. We start with the base image, which is .NET 8 ASP.NET runtime. This lightweight image is what will eventually run our application. We switch to app user, set the working directory to app, and export ports 8080 and 8081, which the application will run on. Next, we move to the build stage, which uses the full .NET SDK image. This image contains all the tools needed to restore packages, build the projects, and publish it. We define a build configuration argument, defaulting to release, and set the working directory to src. We then copy the project file into the container and run .NET Restore to download dependencies. And after that, we copy the rest of the source code and run that build command to compile the project. The build output is stored in app build. After build, we move to publish stage. We move into the publish stage, which takes the compiled output and run .NET Publish. This generates the final optimized version of application inside app publish. We also disable the app host to keep the publish output small, which is ideal for containers. Finally, in the final stage, we return to the ASP.NET runtime base image. This ensures the final container is small, fast, and secure. We set our working directory to app and copy the published output into this final runtime image. The container will start by running the application using the entry point .NET Test Web App Docker TLL. Let's open a command prompt from this folder and give this particular command. So docker build builds an image, -t docker test tab 1.0 gives your image a name and tag, and .tag at the end tells Docker to use the Docker file in the current directory. And when we give this command, we can see that our image is building. Now an image is built from this Docker file. So now we can give this docker run command to run this image created from Docker file. We can see here it is now running in port 8080. Let's go to the browser and browse it. So we can see here that when I browsed localhost 8080, we can see our app is running, and we are running this app inside a container. See that we have created a Docker file, created an image from that Docker file, and we are running a container from this image. Next, we will see how we can push this image to Docker Hub. So now let's see how we can push this image created to Docker Hub. So first, we need to log into Docker Hub. So let's try the command docker login. So I am already logged in. So login succeeded. But if you are not already logged in or you don't have an account in Docker Hub, first go and create an account into Docker Hub and then type docker login, and it will prompt you to give your credentials in the browser. Now let's see how many images we have. Docker images. And here we have these many images. So this is the image that we created in the previous section. So let's try to push it. So command is docker push, that give image name and tag name. Okay, so it is giving us access denied. So to push images to Docker, you should tag your image with your username in the Docker. So let's try to tag this image. So tag is done. Let's again see Docker images. So we have square of you Docker test app image is there. Now let's try to push this image. So we will give the image name and tag and then with username. So Docker push and image name. Let's see if it is going to be pushed, and we can see here now it is pushing our image to Docker Hub, and it is successfully pushed to Docker Hub. Let's go to Docker Hub and see if we can see the image, and here you can see that image square of you Docker test app is successfully pushed to Docker Hub. So in this video we have seen that how we can create a Docker file, how we can create an image from that Docker file. That all we have done in a local sample ASP.NET Core app, and how we can create and run a container from that image. Then we have seen how we can push our image to remote repo, which is Docker Hub. If you are using any cloud provider like AWS and Azure, then you can push your image to AWS and Azure as well. So this was the information I wanted to give in this video. Hope this was informative. If you like the video, please don't forget to like and subscribe the channel. It will motivate us to create more such videos. Thank you very much.